If our last episode with doctors Dave Myers and June Gruber was about why psychology matters in the classroom, then this episode is about what exactly to do with it. Today we're talking about creating classrooms where belonging, empathy, and those tiny powerful moments of connections aren't just theories, they're part of the lesson plan. And spoiler alert, these strategies aren't just for psychology professors. Welcome back to the What and Who of EDU, where we bring you insights from the leading educators, researchers, and innovators who are shaping the future of teaching and learning. On our podcast, we share real-world classroom strategies that help you create a more impactful and effective learning environment. I'm your host, Marissa Bluestone, and today we welcome back two incredible minds who just happen to be the authors of the #1 psychology textbook, Dr. Dave Myers and Dr. June Gruber. And in this episode, we'll move from theory to practice. But before we dig in, I did want to note that this episode includes discussion of student mental health challenges. And if that's not the right fit for you today, we completely understand, and we'll see you in a future episode. Creating a sense of belonging is a major factor in student success. What are some strategies that psychology educators can use to foster a sense of belonging in their own classrooms?
I love this question because I feel that social connection right now is more important than ever for our students. One, for their well-being. We know that social relationships and connecting with others are the biggest predictor of wellness and happiness and buffer against stress. And two, because they, in that context, can help students be more equipped to learn and to thrive in their classroom and make the most of their education. Some of the strategies that I think can be very helpful, first are one, I always say to raise awareness. So teaching students about the latest facts and findings in psychology about why a sense of belonging matters. So first, to empower them with belonging. But I'll also add, even within the classroom, we can do some pretty simple activities with students to get them to break out of the static sit in a chair and listen passively to your instructor modality that many of us were raised in, and get them to start doing activities that they're learning about the science and connecting with the person sitting next to them in class, and really getting to build that sense of community in their classroom, whether it's in person or remote based. But I do want to turn it to Dave because he has a really exciting sense of belonging activity he developed for students that I love.
Thank you, June. And even before I get to that, I think there's some things we could do physically, structurally in classrooms to encourage belonging. So, for example, if we're teaching 35 students in a room that had 50 chairs, I would get there early, get rid of 18 of the chairs, stack them in the back, expecting maybe 32 students. I would put them in two arcs of chairs with the students close together so they're facing the front and the instructor, but also seeing each other's faces, not just the backs of each other's heads. I see some colleagues here have students pick up name placards, which are at the front of their desk, so you can see the name of every other student in the class. By the way, this works not in that intro to psych class that you took at UCal Berkeley, June, with 700 students, but it works with 35 students or 40 students in a class. And so that's something we can do to help facilitate relationships as well as the kind of discussion and interaction that we build into the class. I've created a new activity related to this deep human need to belong that you spoke of, June. And I featured the work of my colleague friend, Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago, who has done fascinating, simple, elegant, life-relevant experiments on what I call micro-friendships. And so he invites people who normally just have their noses in their phones or whatever to engage in small relationships with other people. He induces them with a $5 Starbucks card or something like that to either strike up a conversation with the barista or not, or to strike up a conversation with a Chicago subway passenger or not. And overwhelmingly, what people thought would be an awkward, difficult experience turns out to be a deeply rewarding experience. And so part of the lesson for students is take the initiative. And by the way, this works for introverts as well as extroverts. If you will take the initiative to reach out to somebody to, just strike up a conversation in the lunch line or in the grocery store line or whatever, you will find your own day enriched, and you will enrich other people's days as well, because you're in this micro way addressing what you talked about, June, this great, deep human need to belong, to connect. We are social animals, as Aristotle long ago recognized, and that's just foundational to human flourishing.
All right. We talked a little bit about things that you could do in class to help students feel like they belong. Are there any other go-to activities that you love for helping psych concepts really click with students?
Yeah, there are definitely some go-to classroom activities that I've really appreciated for helping my students really connect to the material and bring it to life for their own, lived experience. Some of these we've integrated into a new slide deck that accompanies the textbook, so they're readily available for instructors to use. I'll give a few examples that I think are really helpful. So, for example, when we're teaching students about stress and flourishing, one of the things I really enjoy doing, and that's in this slide deck, is a pre-class activity. So before I get to how do psychologists define stress and what's the latest, greatest research on it, is to first have students have a first-person experiential exercise. So we show them the perceived stress scale, they fill it out themselves, and then they reflect on what's my own current stress level. So you're both showing them the way researchers measure stress, but you're actually doing it in a way that I think is more meaningful because they're connecting it to their own experience and something that they can relate to as students. Then what I like to do, kind of sprinkled throughout the lecture, is a combination of pausing and doing these reflective, what we've called ask yourself questions, where we say, if you were to think about how stress affects your life and how you respond to stress, what are three main ways you would think about that? What are three main types of stressors? So we're doing both a kind of check-in on the content we just talked about, but in a way that's connecting to what they're going through and what their experience is. And then I also love just pausing and just in the middle of class, like doing a quick, even multiple choice. One, so that they get a sense of like, what's the exam going to look like that's coming up? It can reduce anticipatory test anxiety. And it also lets them know what are the important concepts that I should have taken away at this point and kind of assess their own learning. So I think a combination of breaking up lectures with doing personal exercises where they can fill out questionnaires to assess their own experience or their own stress, quick multiple choice questions like throughout that just kind of pause them, get them out of the passive listening mode into more active learning, and then reflective ask yourself questions that take what they learned and say, have you seen this concept in your own daily life, and what does that look like? And they become just a natural, organic part of a given class lecture, and they're fun.
And you, Dave, what do you think? Are there any go-to activities that you love?
Oh, yes. By the way, I have 5 or 6. They all have the criteria of they are brief. They take like 5, at most 10 minutes to do. They illustrate and bring to life some big idea, some concept from the chapter, and they allow students to experience that and witness it and hopefully remember it better.
Dave, what are some ways we can help students connect psychology to their everyday lives?
Well, everything in our book is about connecting psychology to everyday lives. Everything, even something so abstract as sensation perception. I mean, I invite students to think about what's happening right now in this moment as you're listening to this audio. I'm taking ideas, formless ideas in my mind, converting them into the movements of my vocal apparatus, which is sending air molecules jostling through space, which are being likewise emitted by the speaker that where you are, that's sending air molecules jostling through space, striking your eardrums, causing the bones of your middle ear to jiggle, which send fluid-filled waves up the cochlea, causing your hair cell receptors to bend like wheat in moving water, triggering electrical impulses up the auditory nerve to your brain, which decodes that information. Voila, what have we just experienced? Wireless mind-to-mind communication through jostling air molecules. If you're writing a science fiction novel in which alien creatures engaged in mind-to-mind transmission of ideas by jostling air molecules, you'll think that is weird. That's us. And so that's our everyday life. That's our ordinary experience. That, by the way, would be an example of one of the wonders that's embedded in our daily life that we just take for granted.
I was thinking about June's last episode where she spoke about not all AWW, but AWE. And just
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's just one of many, many examples.
Amazing. June, what do you think? How can we help connect psychology to the everyday lives of students?
I was thinking about what you just noted, the AWE, not AWW. And we've done some exercises in my course. We call it Science to Life, where we assign students these kind of exercises and practices they're going to have to do outside of the classroom and then bring back their experiences at the same time that we learn about what have psychologists found when studying these experiences. So one of them is having students. I had them do it recently where they went and took an awe walk. That was their assignment, to download this script that's been used in studies, looking at awe and wonder, to find a day in the coming week and to go take a 10 or 15-minute awe walk. And their assignment was to then come back and say how it went. And then we would put that alongside what have psychology researchers found. And we would have this wonderful conversation of what does the science say and how does that connect with or relate to the experience they had doing this? We've done the same thing too with things like happiness and well-being. So while we're talking about, what does psychology say happiness is? What does it look like? How do people define it? How do they try to study it? I ask my students to, in their own life, go to the Positive Psychology Center at the University of Pennsylvania and download at least 3 of their surveys and take it for themselves and see what they think. Do they think happiness is about a sense of joy? Do they think it's about connecting with others, a sense of purpose? All of the above. But I think it's really important to give students the opportunity to really live psychology in their everyday lives through different kinds of behavioral experiments they can try on themselves and really truly be part of the science rather than just hear it and learn it.
Let's flip the script a little. How do you suggest psychology educators handle the emotionally heavy material, but in a way that's honest and supportive still to their students?
I think that's a great question because I do think educators are handling more emotionally heavy material, both in the content they're teaching, but also in the emotional experiences their students are having right now in a way that is a very different landscape than what it is before. So, for example, I'm often teaching a lecture, sometimes an entire class, on psychological disorders. This can cover things from depression to substance abuse. And these are heavy topics for our students, many of whom may be struggling with those experiences right now. And so we're coming in these topics that are very heavy in and of themselves and are very real for students right now in the landscape of the mental health challenges our students are facing. The way I try to approach it is to, one, remind them, of course, that there are topics we're going to learn about in the vast range of human experience that may be sensitive, and that our kind of responsibility to each other as a classroom and as an educator is to do this in a fact-based approach. We're going to share the science in a non-judgmental atmosphere and environment where all student questions are valued and perspectives are heard. And then third, in terms of making sure students feel supported on the topic of mental health, to let them know that we have, as a class, resources for mental health if they need it. So this is something we've also created for instructors, a slide deck of here are common mental health resources for students, and then here's a template that you can create. It can be a simple slide or handout where you can fill in the blanks of resources at your particular educational institution. So that you can let them know, acknowledge the reality that some of this is sensitive, but that we're still going to talk about the science. And if they need more support around that topic or they know someone who does, here's some resources that they can have at their disposal.
Psychology is showing up everywhere and not just in psychology classes. So what are some ways that educators in other fields, say they're teaching a STEM class or they're teaching a literature class, what are some ways that they can integrate psychology concepts into their teaching?
Okay. So just a couple ideas. One, I think that the concept of the importance of active rehearsal of information in order to retain it applies to all fields, to instruction in STEM courses as well as psychological science. So we can't just throw information at people. We need to have them actively process it, engage it, rehearse it. There's another idea that's about to appear in an article in the American Psychologist by our colleagues Doug Bernstein and Sue France, two leaders in the teaching of psychology field. They argue, first of all, that studies of what students remember long after taking psychology courses are kind of discouraging. They find that students often forget much of what we thought we so effectively taught them. And their recommendation based on that is that maybe we should be teaching fewer things better. Now, there's two ways to go about doing that. One is to just lop off whole topics, as some have suggested, and as the International Baccalaureate High School class, for example, does. The other way, which would be the way I'd recommend, and Bernstein and France, I think, are encouraging, is to focus on fewer really big, take-home, life-relevant ideas that educated people should know. And so for June and I, as textbook authors, that raises the question, what are those ideas and what aren't those ideas that maybe we can let go? Bernstein and France and my own experience encouraged me to think that we could leave the distinction between structuralism and functionalism in the history of psychology to a later course. That is, as something that's historically important, but if we teach it 3 months from now, students will have trouble telling us what that is. Or it's really important if you want to have a deep understanding of the neural functioning of our brains to understand the sodium-potassium pump. That is the biochemistry by which nerve transmission happens. But what are the chances that students are going to remember that if taught? What are the big take-home ideas that we really think are important and we need to effectively teach with evidence, stories, and demonstration? And so that, and by the way, I have an invited commentary on the Bernstein France article that's to appear in the American Psychologist, and I give my own list of those big take-home ideas, which, not coincidentally, are ideas that are big ideas in our textbooks.
Yeah, I think that big take-home idea is pretty relevant to any discipline.
Exactly. That's what I'm suggesting, not just psychology.
Yeah. And for you, June, what do you think?
I think some tips that educators from any field may be able to benefit from that psychology has brought to light, I think include stress management around test taking. So we know that students, in every discipline are likely going to have some deadline or some assessment or some exam that they need to complete. And I always love a couple insights from psychology that instructors can share with their students, which is one around, anxiety and stress and that just right balance of it's okay to have some stress and anxiety and teach students that some level of anxiety can be adaptive. It can motivate us. It can help us focus. It can help us really be more vigilant. But that too much, right, can lead us to maybe not retain information as well or not focus as well. So teaching them about kind of anxiety and stress around test taking and that there's a just right amount. The other finding that I really love around teaching students how to study for exams and how to be effective in performing in those contexts comes from some of the research of Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley and others around the importance of sleep, not only for our physical health, but also for our psychological health. And that, in fact, when students think that they can pull an all-nighter and that that's going to help them perform well the next day, they would be of benefit to learn that pulling an all-nighter and having either some level of partial sleep deprivation or full deprivation is actually going to lead them to perform worse the next day. So they do themselves a favor if they got their 8 or so hours of sleep the night before an exam. So teaching them about stress and anxiety and that just right amount, and also the importance of getting a good night's rest before an exam the next day.
I love my sleep, so I would never argue with that.
And students are routinely sleep deprived. And again, it's a matter of living intentionally and appreciating the extent to which sleep helps people remember and lock in skills in learning, as well as boost both their sense of energy and their emotional well-being. Sleep is more important than students seem to appreciate.
All right, well, let's take a turn in the questions. Dave, you've written about hearing loss. What has your research and advocacy work in the area revealed about how we can design more inclusive learning environments?
Well, I love that question because this is kind of my pet avocational project. It's sort of human factor psychology applied. Human factors is all about the design of things for real people's use. In the United States, people with hearing loss, if they are in a difficult hearing environment with a PA system, it might be an auditorium, a worship place, or whatever, can, if they take the initiative, check out a portable receiver and headset to give them special sound. But very few people do that in a movie theater, or a worship place, or a lecture hall. A quarter century ago, I was in the United Kingdom. I was in an abbey off the west coast in Scotland, and I had new hearing aids. They had a little magnetic telecoil that receives a magnetic signal from an assistive listening system that can broadcast magnetically, and my wife nudged me to try it. I pushed a button, and I couldn't believe it. Suddenly, this crystal clear voice was speaking from the center of my head. That technology is like everywhere in the United Kingdom, and it was almost nowhere in the United States. So I thought, why can't we do this? Let's experiment with our community. And fast forward to today, virtually every worship place and auditorium in my community has this technology. So I can go to a lecture in a lecture hall on my campus, push a button, and the speakers are not in the ceiling. They're inside my ears, delivering sound customized for our own needs. So I've become an advocate of this. I've written 36 articles, created a website, and so forth. And just last week, I was at the National Cathedral, which has just installed this technology for the first time there as sort of a model to the nation. It's working beautifully, funded, by the way, by the royalties from our textbook, which all go to a family foundation and does things like this, helping people who don't hear to hear. And we're talking about people with an invisible disability who otherwise just don't get noticed, to hear in difficult situations. We in the United States can do so much better. And I think we now are increasingly.
I agree. And I hope it gets even better. I always say that accessibility is very much a journey and one that we should continue to be on. All right. June, you often collaborate across disciplines, from neuroscience to art to public health and philosophy. What's something exciting that's happening at the intersection of psychology and another field that educators should know about?
I love collaborating, and I love working with people that come from different backgrounds and perspectives. There are many exciting things happening at this intersection of psychology and other fields. I think the two that stand out to me the most have to do with nature and art. Who doesn't love both of those? The first one, thinking about nature, involves some rich collaborations with a wonderful colleague of mine here in Colorado, Colleen Reed, who has recently founded a new major in public health for undergraduates, which I just think is so exciting. And she and I and a graduate student, Stevie Ibani, have been looking at how people's mental health and well-being is affected by getting outdoors in nature. This is related to some of the work we've talked about in a previous episode of awe and wonder. But in particular, we're trying to understand when we have students go out and take a walk in a beautiful mountain landscape and look at that compared to their experience in an art museum. Is there something unique about getting out in nature that really fosters a greater sense of wonder and well-being than when we're in a beautiful, albeit indoor location? So really trying to look at green space and nature and its perhaps untapped mental health benefits for young adults and for all of us. The other project that I think is really exciting is some work that we've been doing with an art professor, Sabrina Marquez, and a social neuroscientist, Paulo Boggio, in Sao Paulo in Brazil, to really bring these fields together of the brain, mental health, and art to better understand exactly how does doing some sort of creative activity, how does that change the way our mind works and the way we feel? But also, and for many of us, we may not be artists in our free time where we're painting or drawing or creating, but we are people who will consume and view art in the world. So we also want to look at how does just witnessing some art that someone else created impact your well-being. And we've gone out to art museums and brought eye tracking to look at what people are, mobile eye tracking to see what people are attending to. We've had them try out different emotion regulation mindsets to really start to probe this age-old question, which is, humans have been creating art for as long as we can probably remember in humanity, but we know surprisingly little about how it affects the way we feel.
Speaking of how we feel, how can educators model pro-social behaviors like empathy, openness, and social connecting, and not just teach them?
Well, certainly we can do that in how we interact with students in our classes by practicing listening actively and reflecting what students are saying. And as June was saying earlier, accepting students' comments and curiosities and questions as they are. Another thing we can do that I always did when teaching regular classes of like 35 students per section is on the first day of class, invite every student to sign up for a 5-minute time the next day to come in and sit with me in my office, allowing me to get to know these students and to feel less threatened by them, to make them into friends, if you will, asking them about their background, where they're from, what their interests are, why they happen to be here, why they're taking this course, and then to remind them, you now know where I am and my door is open and you're welcome back anytime. The next day I go to class after having a 5-minute conversation with the 90% of them who remembered to honor their appointments and come in. It's a totally different feel for me. Now I feel like I'm among friends. And that's a foundation then for my ongoing relationship with them.
I agree with everything that Dave has said. And the only thing I would complement that with is the importance of these micro interactions with students. So I try to show up to class a bit early. So as students are walking in, it's those little moments of saying hello and how's your day going? A student told me about their dog or something that happened to them that day or something they're going to be doing after class. Like those little moments of being human with your students, I think are really important. And what I try to do too is have moments where we have breakout discussions, or I do a pair and share where they're talking with another peer and then they're going to share it in the class, is to just walk around, the classroom and just check in with them individually, like making simple things as eye contact, asking how they're doing that day. I do think those little micro moments can really build a sense of belonging, connection, and that you're human too. I think the other thing, though, that is less of a day-to-day, but came up for me this semester is when life events are happening in the world, stressful life events, not ignoring them, but maybe giving a moment in class to just touch base and connect. So I had this is an unusual event on my first day of class this year, where in the middle of the class, we had a shelter-in-place alert from the university where there was a potential safety issue on campus and we had to stay in our classroom. That's not something that I would recommend happen to anyone's classroom, but I bring it up because it was an opportunity to, rather than try to ignore what was happening or avoid or push through the material that would be inappropriate, to just pause and check in with the class. What's been their experience with these sort of situations? And it opened up an entire half-hour conversation with my class about their sense of support on campus, their sense of belonging, and the needs that they have right now. So just as life happens, not ignoring it, but welcoming it as like a conversation with the class.
June, you said something, I made your comments in addition to that really wonderful illustration at the end about getting to class ahead of time, being prepared, ready to go. One way you love your students is by being there early and being able to greet them as they come in and having incidental conversations. I should have been better at practicing that myself, I think.
I'm sure you did other wonderful and amazing things for your students. But speaking of doing things for your students, what's a small thing that a professor did when you were a student that sticks with you today?
Oh, this is just a funny incidental thing, but I remember it vividly. I was a chemistry major at a small college. There were only 3 chemistry professors. And I, in like organic lab, for example, would constantly ruin my experiments by breaking beakers. And finally, the exasperated professor, who was somebody I was close to, made me write 500 times, "I will not break glass," or something to that effect. And so I had to handwrite this out. And I did. But in the middle, I put, "Dr. Bach, if you read this, I will give you a Coke," thinking he would never see that sentence. And about 5 weeks later, he came roaring into the lab, hilariously laughing. He had somehow found that sentence and I owed him a Coke.
Oh, that's wonderful. It's the little things, isn't it?
Yeah.
June, how about you? What's something a professor did that still stands out to this day?
I remember being awestruck by my professors when I was an undergraduate. Like, they felt larger than life. At my university, they were very large-sized psychology classes. And I remember one day mustering up the courage to try to go at the end of class and ask my professor a question. And I was very nervous doing this. And I remember asking him a question, and then he asked if we wanted to just go to the coffee shop next door and continue the conversation. It was a simple 20-minute conversation, just the university campus coffee shop. But the fact that they took this moment, again, it's this like moment to outside of class to learn about what I was interested, to know my name. I'll never forget it because it felt like I was really part of the field and that my questions mattered. It was really special.
Yeah, I can say from personal experience that teachers change lives. And it's a little thing. They might not think anything of it, but it makes a huge difference for the students. A big thanks to Dave and June for reminding us that psychology is about more than just studying people. They make belonging sound less like a theory and more like something you can actually do, like move a chair, say a name, or make eye contact. Small stuff, big impact. Tune in next time when we talk to the duo about what happens when students do the same. We're talking using psychology not just to understand the world, but to navigate it too. And a special treat for those of you who stayed with us this long. Check the show notes for links to Dave's classroom activities and more. Until next time, I'm Marissa Bluestone, and this is the What and Who of EDU.